We'll recap day 4 of action in the World Juniors group stage. Canada gets upset by Sweden and gets shut out. We'll talk about that and a lot more on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects rated for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalikesh, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we'll be breaking down day 4 of action in the World Juniors group stage. There were 4 games, and all 4 of them were really, really interesting. So we'll get into that, break down what happened in those games. There were a couple upsets, some really interesting score lines. A lot of players had really good performances. We'll get into all of that. We'll also delve a bit more into the Canada-Sweden game in our second segment, including the fact that Matt Savoy probably got injured in that game because Jagger Firkus just got called up. And we'll be playing with Team Canada. We'll be joining them in Sweden for the rest of the tournament there. So we'll talk about what we can expect from him as well. And then in our third segment, we'll do a very simple 3 stars of the day. For day 4, there were, again, a lot of really good performances from a lot of really good players. So we'll get into that and break that down as well. But before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 that you can get if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get things started with the first game of day 4, Slovakia versus Norway. It ended up 8-4 in favor of Slovakia. That's a score that fans will like, right? A lot of players performed really well. Some high scores in that game. Dalibor Dvorsky and Servac Petrovsky for Slovakia both earned 2 goals and 2 assists in that game. But there were some other really interesting score lines here as well. Talk me through it.
Yeah, for sure. It was a very fun game. We saw some very good players put up a lot of points, as you mentioned. I think some standouts in my eyes would be Michael Brandsegg-Nygård, who scored 2 very pretty goals, showcasing his impressively powerful release on top of his high-end work ethic. Like I think it was his first goal where he was just pressuring in the defensive zone and just completely outworked and outpaced the Slovakian defenseman to get through on goal and quite confidently pod home that goal. And the other one was Filip Mesar, who was the creative fulcrum of the Slovakian team in this game. He registered 3 assists, which may have been a bit more subtle compared to the 2-goal, 2-assist performances of Petrovsky and Dvorsky, but I thought that he was really the offensive catalyst for them. But yeah, a ton of really, really fun performances here.
Yeah, absolutely. I also really like Maxim Strabok's game. Watching back and seeing the way that he earned his 3 assists, but also the way that he played defensively. I know that Norway managed to score 4 goals against Slovakia. It was an off game for Adam Gajan, but overall, I thought that Maxim Strabok was really a focal point of that defense. He played really well. Showcased his ability to close gaps, but Maxim Strabok has always been that kind of that mold of intelligent defenseman. He's not necessarily the type of defenseman who's going to out-muscle players, but he will outthink them consistently. And yeah, he's a really, really interesting prospect on that back end for Slovakia. And yeah, overall, I mean, who do you think had the best game of these 2 teams in this matchup?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I know that you're partial to Servac Petrovsky in here, and we'll get a lot more into that performance later on in the third segment when we look over our 3 stars of the day. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm gonna give a little shout out to Filip Mesar, who has just been lights out in this tournament. He's really, really been the dynamic piece that Slovakia has needed, and I mean, this roster is looking really, really good being led by him on a creative standpoint. You just have to imagine what it would look like if they'd been able to bring guys like Slavkovsky and Nemec to this tournament. It would have been exceptionally fun.
Absolutely. Even though Adam Shakora is the captain of that team officially, I think Filip Mesar is the leader on the ice. The performances he's been putting through are just off the charts. He's been extremely good at this tournament, showcasing why Habs fans were wrong to kind of sort of write him off throughout the last year. I know he had an off year with Kitchener, but he has been really, really good. But moving on to the 4-0 win of Finland over Latvia, Jere Lassila had a 3-point game in that game, and he's been just lights out all tournament, right? He if Finland is known for not having necessarily the higher end offensive roster and being more of a kind of stacked defensively type of roster, I think Jere Lassila has been the guy who they can kind of default to when they need an offensive performance. And yeah, he's been solid overall. Any other standouts for you in that game? Anyone that might have popped off the radar? Because for me, it was Lassila all the way. I think that was really his game.
It certainly was. Like he was the standout piece for Finland, and I think the fact that this is an undrafted player who is not only leading his team offensively, but is also captaining Finland at this tournament. It's a really good story, and he'll definitely get some draft consideration. I'm definitely going to start digging into some of his regular league footage and kind of see how he's improved over the last year or two to kind of track to see if he's an undrafted player that we're going to have our eyes on at Dobber Prospects for the 2024 draft class. But the other one is one that we've already talked about extensively in Jesse Pulkkinen, who scored a really pretty goal, just continues to shine as a mobile and really fun, skilled, and fluid defenseman. He's fluid in everything he does, whether it be his transition defending or his handling, especially, has just been lights out all tournament. Another very fun game for him.
Absolutely. He's so unique too. It's so rare that you see a 6'6" defenseman whose main attribute is his hands. It's really surprising. But moving on to I think the tighter game of all of these. Czechia versus USA ended up with a 4-3 shootout win for USA. A really interesting shootout as well. Jacob Fowler was lights out in the shootout, was kind of hung out to dry on the 3 goals during regulation that were scored. A lot of situations where it was a low to high play where a player was left alone in the slot. That was 2 of the goals. Another one was a pinpoint cross ice pass to the other side where a Czech player put it in. So I struggled to see what Jacob Fowler could have done differently in those games. And so far he's sub 900 in both of the games that he played, but in both cases it was just the defense in front of him not doing much to help him out. But what was really interesting about that game was Lane Hutson was basically used as a defensive defenseman. Like, he saw some power play time, but he was always on the ice on the penalty kill. He was thrown out in the defensive zone for defensive zone faceoffs. I mean, he was effectively used the way that you would expect a Ryan Chesley to be used. And I know they're paired up, but like, that's just strange to me. He just wasn't put in the situations that he's usually put in, and despite that, had a really good game, right?
He did. I thought he was very impactful. It was just a very different type of game that you're not used to seeing from Lane Hutson. He did have one very pretty assist. The one point he did register was on an assist to his pairing mate, Ryan Chesley, where he was really, it was his first big offensive incursion in that game, where he kind of picked up the puck in the defensive zone, just brought it up the ice all on his own, got pretty deep behind the net, and then just sent a pinpoint pass to the high slot where Chesley got a nice one-timer opportunity and put the puck in the back of the net. But overall, it was a very subtle game where he was, as you said, entrusted with those defensive opportunities. And while on the one hand, I find it really interesting to kind of see him in those positions, because going back to his draft year, we've always seen Hutson in insulated roles if he's playing less minutes, but kind of playing like an all-offense role, or if he's being fed 30 minutes a night like he is at BU, it is every single offensive zone draw. And in this game, it was very different. Zeev Buium was getting a lot of the power play opportunities. He was getting a lot of the offensive zone faceoffs, and Lane Hutson was left to the defensive work. And I thought it was fascinating. I don't think it's the strategy that gets the most out of Lane Hutson and brings the most value to your team, but it definitely shows that there is some more versatility to his game than perhaps fans are used to seeing, and that the defensive side of his game has progressed a significant amount since his draft year.
Oh, for sure, and that's a key element. I also want to mention the fact that the Smith Perot Leonard line was key in this game. Even
Yeah.
though they only earned a point collectively, it wasn't a 3 goal game. So but overall their
And it was a
play,
gorgeous goal where
it was
that
a
they
really
combined
really
on.
pretty
It was
goal.
beautiful, and it
Yeah,
showed the exact chemistry that they have been building up for so long. It
yeah.
was a very nice one.
Absolutely. Outside of that, I still think Cutter Gauthier needs to work on his shot selection. That's continued to be a concern, which is weird because he basically only has assists in this tournament so far. But yeah, his shot selection has been completely off. Outside of that, I thought not Nicholas Coco, Michael Hrabal had a decent game. That was a really good game for the goaltender for Czechia. And yeah, I mean, overall, I thought USA should have won that game. But the three key mistakes that Czechia capitalized on, and that's the type of thing that happens usually that makes you lose a game as a favorite in a matchup, right? But yeah, Isaac Howard was fantastic as well. Scored the first goal, scored the shootout winner. I loved the Selly as well, slicking back the hair, all that good. So we know how Isaac Howard is a showman. He's shown that time and time again. I think back to his draft year where he showed up with a massive belt and a cowboy hat. It's just Ike Howard. These are the moments he lives for, and I'm excited to see him kind of try to step it up as the quarterfinals, semifinals, and hopefully finals come around. And yeah, it's a great performance overall from Howard and Team USA, and they win it in the shootout. But that wraps things up for our first segment. We'll get to our second segment where we talk about pretty much the biggest and most viewed game on that day of Canada versus Sweden. On Swedish ground, it was a really interesting performance. We'll talk about what went wrong for Canada, what the score was, who was good, who was bad. We'll get into that after these messages from our sponsors over at FanDuel.
The NFL season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays. Find bets in the new Explore tab and make a parlay in the Parlay Hub to find the best way for popular parlays. So visit fanduel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll be talking about pretty much the most viewed game from from day 4, and that was Canada versus Sweden. Sweden won 2-0 over Canada in that game and just outplayed them in every element. But I think the key elements in which Sweden outplayed Canada were the most important. They played with more structure. They played with more purpose. They played with more defensive acumen, and overall just outthought and outranked them in terms of their overall ability to play as a team. Canada seemed more like a bunch of individuals on the ice, except for maybe 20 minutes of the game where the Beck, Danielson, Allard line really seemed like a good shutdown, cohesive
Yeah.
line. Outside of that, they had to mix up all the lines because nothing was working in terms of chemistry and cohesiveness, right?
It was a tough game to watch for Canada. Like, there
Yeah.
was a real lack of chemistry, and with Sweden, these are all players that have been playing together for so long, and with Team Canada, there's a lot of just mix and matching,
Yeah.
and I think that familiarity really showed in this game specifically. Like, the defensive structure was as solid as what you'd expect from a team of highly skilled 19-year-olds that have been playing together for the last 3 years, and they've been playing together, but quite sporadically. So the fact that they are looking this compact, this structured, is a testament to just how strong that defensive core and the coaching on that team is.
Yeah.
But for Canada, it was difficult. Again, Macklin Celebrini was the spark plug in that lineup. He was creating opportunities, and we saw him finish closer to top 6 minutes. I think he finished off with 16 and a half minutes and
Yeah.
is now dressing as a first line center at practice. So thankfully that is happening now. And I think Canada stands a better chance with him playing as many minutes as possible, especially against these composed defenses. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was a rough game, especially for the players that were playing those first 5 minutes to start the game. Like Connor Geeky really struggled to create things offensively.
Yeah.
Jordan Dumais has been a near non-factor offensively in this tournament so far, and his lack of pace, I think, has really been in the spotlight, where he's consistently getting himself to dangerous positions, getting the puck in dangerous positions. But the pace to pull off a play, to read what is happening quickly enough to create opportunities against the best defenses in this tournament just hasn't quite been there yet. So hopefully, like, adding Jagger Firkus into this mix could change something, because it looks like Matt Savoy is out with injury now for the rest of the tournament, and they're calling in Jagger Firkus as reinforcements, who, I mean, of all the players that Canada could be adding to the roster, he is one that really could inject a lot of skill and dynamism into the lineup, which they desperately lacked in this game against Sweden.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other element of that is just, you're looking at you mentioned Jordan Dumais. I don't think he's the only player in what we would consider kind of the top 6 or top 9 of Canada officially
far from it,
that has been absent. I mean, Fraser Minton, who's their captain, has not been performing up to par. Easton Cowing as well has been, kind of waning in and out of these games. And he's not the only one. Braden Yeager. I mean, even Carson Rakoff, who is probably the best shooter on that team, is only
being given 4 minutes a night.
Yeah, like, it's just, it doesn't make sense. And then you add to that the fact that Macklin Celebrini is still kind of riding the pine on that bottom 6. I thought after the last game he had, where he absolutely thrashed his opponents in Latvia and scored 5 points against them, I thought it's inevitable that he would get a shot up there. And also Matt Savoy has not been up to par. Looking at that team, it was very clear that they were lacking 2 things: enough skill and enough structure. In the top 6 at least. So I think Jagger Firkus getting injected into that top 6 would be fantastic for that team. But I would not be surprised to see them kind of. I would not be surprised to see Canada throw out a 4th line of Carson Rakoff, Macklin Celebrini, and Jagger Firkus, and just anger the hell out of all of us. I would not be surprised at all.
I mean, I think at the very least, Celebrini is going to be in the top line from now on out, hopefully, because that was a true wake-up call against Sweden. But look, Canada has the personnel to turn this around. They have the personnel to play a skill-based style of play, but they've been opting not to. And they could put guys like Rakoff, Wood, and now Jagger Firkus into that top 6 to top 9 to really add some goal-scoring elements, because they have more than enough like solid defensive pieces for that bottom 6, but they've been eating up all the offensive minutes, which has not exactly helped Canada so far in this tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a line of Minton, Cowan, and Savoy works way better as a 3rd line than a 1st or a 2nd.
I agree.
It's not computing with me right now. And you look at their defense as well, and they got solid pieces in there. Their goaltender, Mathis Rousseau, was the only reason they were even close in this game. Like,
he was excellent.
He was fantastic in that game. Made a 10 bell save. Just basically did the splits and caught the puck with the tip of his skate.
And he wowed King Henrik in doing so.
If Henrik Lundqvist is looking up at the replay and going "wow" audibly in front of cameras, you know you did good. So yeah, Mathis Rousseau was really, I think, the only player from Team Canada that can comfortably say deserved, some flowers after this game, because overall it was just a disappointing performance from everyone. And again, the lack of chemistry, the lack of cohesiveness was extremely clear, especially when Canada just started throwing any lines out there to pray that something happened, and nothing was working because, again, there are not enough complementary skill sets in this roster that can work together. Again, that Beck, Danielson, Allard line, throw them out there against the best, they'll do their job.
For sure.
Outside of that, it's a bit confusing. But that wraps things up for our 2nd segment. We'll get into our 3rd, where we do the 3 stars of today's games, of day 4's games, rather. We'll get into that, who deserves their laurels, and also 3 honorable mentions, because it was hard to choose. We'll get into that after these messages from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Alrighty, so it's 3 stars time here in our final segment. We'll go through the honorable mentions first, because there were a couple names that could have earned a star and just missed the cut. Obviously, we just talked about him. Mathis Rousseau had a fantastic game. And again, was the only reason Canada was anywhere near, being close in this game against Sweden. But it was a 2-0 loss. It's hard to give him the laurels. We just had to mention his name for that fantastic save he did, right?
Did you see just how happy he was when he was accepting his Player of the Game award? It was just pure pride. He knew exactly how well he played. I'm pretty sure he'd already seen the replay of Henrik Lundqvist like applauding and wowing at his save. game of a lifetime, and a 2-0 loss is something interesting for Team Canada. But
Yeah,
Mathis Rousseau, what a day for him, and truly
absolutely.
deserved for an HM here on our list.
Absolutely, and I don't think it's going to be the last time we hear his name. I'd be very surprised if you don't hear his name on draft day. These kind of tournaments are where these guys get noticed, and
Yeah,
I would not be surprised at all. And he's been really, really good in the QMJHL as well. You can do
he
worse
has.
than that with a 6th or 7th round pick, right? I mean, it's just he's doing really well. But
Goalies are
another on
weird. Take
absolutely they
swings.
are. Absolutely, they are. Moving on to Isaac Howard as another honorable mention. Scored the first goal, scored the shootout winner. That silly alone put him in this conversation. He was just
Style
amazing.
points.
Absolutely. He earns style points and earns an honorable mention on our roster here. And it was just difficult outside of him to choose an honorable mention out of the USA Czechia game. That game overall didn't have really many standouts. Yuri Kulik was average. Edward Chala, he earned an assist, but overall was just kind of average as well.
Lane Hudson was
Um,
good, but
yeah,
it was a more subtle game, and I think we're going to keep our star for Lane Hudson for a game where there's more production behind it.
absolutely. Absolutely. And another honorable mention who really barely missed a cut was Michael Brandsegg-Nygård out of the Norway roster. 2 goals, 1 assist. Yes, it's an 8-4 loss, but he was lights out in that game and showed exactly why, he can become a bona fide top 10 pick. And this is a type of player that like he reminds me a lot of Cutter Gauthier in his draft year. And I've mentioned this before. I would not be surprised if he's the type of player who was circling around the kind of 10 to 20 mark, but then an NHL team gets a good look at him at an international tournament and goes, "This is
Yeah.
our guy," and picks him in the top 5. I would not be surprised at all. What do you think about that,
Not
though? Do you think that's a
not a bit.
likelihood? Yeah.
I don't know, likelihood, definitely possibility. I could
Mhm.
see, like, I think we are falling in love with MBN as a player, and while I don't think he's going to crack our top 5 at Dauber, he's going to be a pretty much a mainstay in our top 10, at least for
Yeah.
the foreseeable future, barring any surprises in terms of late risers. But considering he scored 2 goals against the best goaltender in this tournament, in Adam Gajan so far, not bad, not half
Yeah.
bad.
Absolutely, and showing everyone that the score sheet in the Allsvenskan is not what you should be looking for
Mhm.
when trying to scout Michael Brandsegg-Nygård. He has an offensive skill set that works. He has a shot that works. It's already an NHL shot on top of being a very mature, very poised, very composed player with high-end offensive instincts and defensive instincts. He's just such a mature player in terms of his skill set. But now let's
Mm.
get into the 3 stars for real this time. Let's start off with the 3rd star. We went with Servac Petrovsky. I had to make a push for him. He has been the most consistent player in this tournament so far, and it's also leading the league in leading the tournament in points right now by 2. So exactly, it's not close really. He's doing a great job so far for Slovakia, and his chemistry with Philip Meshar has allowed him to play his game, to get pucks in dangerous areas, to showcase his one timer. And when Meshar gets a bit too explorative, gets caught high up, that's fine. Servac Petrovsky's there to kind of clean up the mess at times. He's also really good defensively. So overall, I thought he had a great, great game against Norway and deserved this star. And then the 2nd star is Jere Lassila. Out of the Finnish roster, the captain of Finland, again an overager who wasn't drafted last year, but is time and time again the player that you can default to when your team doesn't score, right?
For sure, he's been just excellent so far in this tournament, and I mean, as we mentioned earlier, definitely going to start digging a little bit deeper in there as a draftable overager. But he's been lights out so far in this tournament, and you always have to love an underdog story of an undrafted kid be captaining his nation at the World Junior Championships, and when it's a nation as established as Finland in this tournament, you don't even usually see late draft picks captaining this team. So for an undrafted player to do so while leading the charge offensively, yeah, very, very impressive.
Absolutely. And now the 1st star. This one was difficult. We had started off by giving it solely to Hugo Havelid, but talking about it a bit more, we realized that Hugo Havelid wasn't the key reason that Sweden shut out Canada. So we decided to give the 1st star to the entire Swedish D corps and Hugo Havelid as a combined defensive element for Sweden. They were
Yeah.
fantastic. Every lane cut off, every pass basically at risk of being intercepted for Canada. Defensemen were jumping into boards to get into battles, coming out with the puck regularly. I thought, obviously Anton Johansson with the early hit, kind of iffy. But outside of that, I mean, you look at the other defensemen that were playing on this core. Matthias Havelid, who's Hugo Havelid's twin brother, fantastic game, was explosive in this game every time he got the puck. Defensively, their elements were really good. Elias Pettersson, the defenseman for Sweden, who's playing on the first pair right now, had a fantastic game. And yeah, overall, it's hard to find a flaw in their defensive core. And there's a reason why every game for Sweden is just the most electric on in terms of the fans in the stands, because obviously it is in Sweden, but the Swedish team's giving them something to cheer for this year. Like, they've got a shot at this, right?
Oh, they really are. And I mean, I remember before the tournament started and we're doing a lot, like multiple mailbags about the tournament. One of the questions that kept popping up was the Swedish decor. How many right-handed defensemen are going to be in there? Is it going to be okay with all those right shots? It's looking pretty good to me. And they just brought all the best players, did not really care about handedness too much. They brought Tom Willander, who in terms of handedness was a bit of an underdog because he was like the 4th or 5th string right shot defenseman in that depth chart.
And he scored against Canada.
And he scored against Canada. So I think that the structure of the team was really well calculated. I've been very impressed with Sweden's coaching and their management in deciding who to bring to the tournament. Theo Lindstein has been very, very impressive as a depth defenseman for Sweden, eating up a lot of those more difficult and defensive minutes. And he was a late addition to the tournament too. He was a last minute call up. So everything is just kind of falling into place here for Sweden, and their performances have just been lights out. But yeah, I remember pondering after that Canada-Sweden game, Hugo Havelid was really, really good in that game. And he was we can't forget about Hugo Havelid. He was lights out brilliant. I mean, Sweden has conceded 0 goals in 3 games so far in this tournament, and Havelid started 2 of those.
Yeah.
But it's the entire defensive effort, top to bottom, from the coaching to the player selection to the goaltending. Everything has just been working out brilliantly for Sweden on the defensive side of the puck. And as much as it's fun to watch offensive hockey, there's something so satisfying and wonderful of watching a hard-fought battle where, yes, you're seeing a lot of offensive flair and skill. There's no shortage of that in this game. But it was a defensive struggle, and it was structure that won the game, not rampant skill. And for a game between 2 highly skilled lineups, I love to see that.
Absolutely. And it's so rare to see it at a tournament like this, where players are often playing together cohesively for the first time, to be able to put together a structural performance. It's so rare, and it's so beautiful to see, because it looks a lot more like NHL hockey than junior hockey.
Yeah.
It's and that's the separating factor. Playing inside structure is key for any player trying to reach the next level. If you're able to buy into a system and play it perfectly, you're a lot more likely to climb the ranks very, very quickly, versus a player who has more skill than you but doesn't buy into the structure. So I'm excited to see what the Swedish team does as they climb the ranks, because there are a lot of really interesting names in here, especially at forward with Felix and Grossorum basically making this his team. I'm sold on him, and I was, after catching my first glimpses of him halfway through the draft year last year. I was immediately like, oh wow, this is a player who thinks the game at an advanced level. But with the improvements to his skating, with the improvements to his handling, with the added dare to his passing as well, has just become the key kind of central figure, the key creative figure for Sweden moving forward up the ice. So yeah, that's one player especially I'm looking forward to seeing, because he's been fantastic throughout this tournament, but in this last game, it seemed like every play he was making was connecting really well. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. We've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports on a 24/7 news channel. Really great watch. Make sure to check it out, and make sure to tune in for the rest of the week here as we continue our prospects coverage for the month of January and for the World Juniors especially. especially. This has been Hadi Kalikesh with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.